What if I told you there was a debate so intense, so divisive, that it threatened to fracture the very foundation of early Christianity? A single question ignited it all. Was Christ truly divine or just a creation? Stay tuned, because by the end of this video, you'll uncover the pivotal moment at the Council of Nicaea, where one decision changed the course of history and shaped Christian theology as we know it today. Welcome to Ancient Faith Explorations, where we dive into the mysteries and controversies that define the ancient world. Today, we're unraveling the Arian Controversy, a fiery theological battle that revolved around one of the most profound questions. Is Christ equal to God the Father, or is he subordinate? This isn't just ancient history. It's a story of power, politics, and faith colliding in ways that still resonate today. But what do you think? Before we dive deeper, let me know in the comments. Do you believe Christ is fully divine or created by God? And don't go anywhere, because in just a few moments, we'll reveal the high-stakes debate that led to the creation of the Nicene Creed, the cornerstone of Christian orthodoxy. Part 1. The debate over Christ's nature. Imagine this: a gathering of powerful bishops, heated debates raging across a grand chamber, and a single question shaking the very foundation of faith. Is Christ truly divine or merely a creation of God? This wasn't just a theological debate. It was a battle for the soul of Christianity itself. And the stakes? Eternal truths or a fractured church? What would you believe? In the early 4th century, Christianity stood at a crossroads. With Emperor Constantine's recent embrace of the faith, the church suddenly held immense influence. But beneath this newfound unity lay a question so divisive that it threatened to tear the church apart. What is Christ's true nature? Is Christ eternal, existing with God from the very beginning? Or is he a creation, distinct from the Father? This wasn't just a question of doctrine. It was a question of identity, power, and salvation. Let me ask you this. If you were there, facing this monumental question, how would you have answered? 1. The man who lit the fire, Arius. To understand this controversy, we begin with a bold priest from Alexandria, Arius, charismatic, intelligent, and unafraid to challenge the status quo. Arius proclaimed a startling idea. Christ is not co-eternal with God. He was created by the Father, and therefore, he is subordinate. To Arius, this made sense. After all, he argued, how could Christ, the Son, be equal to God, the Father, if he was begotten? His logic was compelling, his arguments sharp, and his followers grew rapidly. But Arius's ideas weren't just revolutionary. They were dangerous. If Christ was created, could he truly redeem humanity? Was he truly divine? Or was he merely a perfect creation? What do you think? Can something created by God ever truly be equal to him? Let me know in the comments. This debate is as thought-provoking now as it was then. 2. The defender of divinity, Athanasius. Opposing Arius was a young deacon named Athanasius, whose passion and intellect would soon make him one of Christianity's greatest defenders. To Athanasius, Arius's teachings weren't just wrong. They were heretical, a direct attack on the core of Christian faith. Athanasius believed that if Christ wasn't fully divine, then salvation itself was at stake. Only someone who was truly God could bridge the gap between humanity and the divine. He famously declared, "The Word was not made, for it was in the beginning, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." This wasn't just a theological argument. It was a fight for the very essence of Christianity. To Athanasius, diminishing Christ's divinity meant dismantling the entire faith. Which side do you find more convincing so far? Arius, with his logical explanation of Christ as created, or Athanasius, with his passionate defense of Christ's divinity? 3. The tension within the church. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Across the Christian world, congregations split. Bishops took sides. Even Constantine, the emperor who sought to unify his empire under Christianity, found himself caught in the middle. This wasn't just a theological debate. It was a battle of politics, influence, and ideology. Entire communities were at odds, and the church risked tearing itself apart. Can you imagine living in a time when such fundamental questions about faith weren't settled? Every sermon, every prayer, every act of worship carried the weight of uncertainty. Now, picture this. Bishops, scholars, and leaders from across the empire gathered to settle the debate once and for all. The First Council of Nicaea was about to begin, but the question remained. Could they find an answer, or would the church collapse under the weight of its own divisions? As the Council of Nicaea convenes, tensions are at an all-time high. Arguments flare, alliances shift, and the future of Christianity hangs in the balance. But what happened behind those closed doors? How did these leaders attempt to resolve the conflict? And what role did Emperor Constantine play in shaping their decision? Stay with me, because in the next part, we'll uncover the key players, the fiery debates, and the controversial solutions that would define the church for centuries to come. Before we move on, let me hear from you. Whose argument resonates with you more, Arius or Athanasius? Do you think the church made the right call in taking sides? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit that like button if this debate has you intrigued, and don't forget to subscribe to Ancient Faith Explorations. We're only scratching the surface of one of the most dramatic events in church history, and you won't want to miss what's next. Part 2, Resolving the Conflict. Picture this. Over 300 bishops gathered under one roof, arguments exploding like thunderclaps as they wrestled with a question that could unite or destroy the church. Behind it all loomed an emperor determined to bring peace, but facing the fiery passions of men unwilling to compromise. This wasn't just a council, it was a battlefield. Are you ready to step into the heart of one of history's most dramatic confrontations? 1. The Gathering Storm. The First Council of Nicaea. The year was 325 AD. The place? Nicaea, a city chosen by Emperor Constantine himself. But this was no ordinary meeting. It was the First Council of Nicaea, a historic assembly convened to resolve the Arian controversy that was tearing the church apart. Constantine, though new to the Christian faith, understood the stakes. A divided church meant a divided empire. He needed unity, not just for spiritual harmony, but for political stability. But could over 300 bishops, each with their own convictions and followers, agree on such a divisive issue? Now imagine the scene. A grand hall filled with voices arguing passionately. Some whispered alliances in corners. Others openly clashed in heated debates. At the center of it all stood the question: was Christ truly divine, equal to the Father, or was he created, distinct and subordinate? Let me ask you this. If you were among those bishops, what would you have argued? 2. Key figures in their clashing visions. On one side stood Arius, the priest whose teachings had ignited this firestorm. Arius wasn't there to back down. With his sharp intellect and unwavering confidence, he argued that Christ, as the Son of God, was begotten and therefore created. For Arius, this wasn't an insult to Christ's greatness, but a logical truth. But opposing him with equal fervor was Athanasius, a fiery young deacon whose passion burned as brightly as his arguments. Athanasius believed that Arius's ideas were not only wrong but dangerous. If Christ was not fully divine, how could he redeem humanity? How could the church worship someone who wasn't truly God? The debates between their supporters were anything but calm. Heated accusations flew, alliances formed and broke, and the tension in the room became almost unbearable. Who do you find more convincing so far? Arius, with his logical reasoning, or Athanasius, with his passionate defense of Christ's divinity? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. 3. The Emperor's role. Constantine the mediator. In the midst of the chaos stood Emperor Constantine. Though not a theologian, Constantine wielded immense influence, and his goal was clear: end the division. To Constantine, the church wasn't just a spiritual entity. It was a cornerstone of his empire's unity. But how could he mediate between such deeply entrenched positions? Constantine played the role of a diplomat, encouraging debate while urging compromise. But even his presence couldn't fully quell the fiery disputes. It's worth asking, should an emperor have this much influence over a religious debate? Does politics belong in theology, or does it taint the process? 4. The creed that changed history. After weeks of debate, the council reached its climax. Led by Athanasius and his allies, the bishops drafted a statement that would become the cornerstone of Christian orthodoxy, the Nicene Creed. This creed declared unequivocally that Christ was begotten, not made, and of one substance with the Father. These words weren't just a theological stance. They were a rejection of Arius' teachings and a declaration of unity. But not everyone agreed. Some bishops hesitated, fearing the consequences of such a definitive stance. Arius and a small group of his supporters outright rejected the creed, refusing to sign. Constantine, determined to enforce unity, exiled Arius and ordered his writings to be burned. It was a dramatic conclusion, but the question remains. Did the council truly resolve the conflict, or did it simply silence one side? 6. The stakes: unity or division. This wasn't just about theology. The stakes were far greater. The council's decision shaped the church's future, defining orthodoxy for generations to come. But it also set a precedent for how theological disputes would be resolved, with councils, creeds, and sometimes the heavy hand of political power. Let me ask you, was this the right way to settle such a profound question? Should unity come at the cost of dissent? Or does true faith allow room for differing interpretations? The First Council of Nicaea was a turning point, but the story doesn't end here. What happened to Arius and his followers after their exile? How did the Nicene Creed impact the Church in the years that followed? And what lessons can we draw from this moment in history? Stick around, because in the next part, we'll uncover the aftermath of the Council and explore how its decisions still echo in our world today. Before we dive into the next chapter, I want to hear from you. Do you think the Nicene Creed was the right solution? How do you feel about Constantine's role in shaping this decision? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit that like button if this story has you hooked, and don't forget to subscribe to Ancient Faith Explorations. There's so much more to uncover, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Part 3. The pivotal moment of the Nicene Creed. Imagine the air so thick with tension, you could almost touch it. Hundreds of bishops sat in heavy silence, their hearts pounding as history balanced on a knife's edge. One document, one decision, and one creed would either unite the church or fracture forever. This was a moment when faith, power, and eternity collided. But here's the question. Was it a triumph of truth or the suppression of legitimate debate? Let's uncover the drama of the Nicene Creed and decide for ourselves. 1. A council on the brink. The year was 325 AD, and the First Council of Nicaea had reached its boiling point. For weeks, theological debates had raged, tempers had flared, and alliances had shifted like sand in the wind. At the heart of the storm stood the question, what is the true nature of Christ? This wasn't just an academic discussion. It was a battle for the soul of Christianity itself. On one side were Arius and his followers, who argued that Christ, though divine, was not eternal but created. On the other side stood Athanasius and his allies, who passionately defended the belief that Christ was fully God, of the same essence as the Father. As the council dragged on, exhaustion weighed heavy on everyone in the room. Yet, they knew the stakes were too high to walk away without a resolution. Emperor Constantine, ever the pragmatic ruler, pressed for unity, but even his commanding presence couldn't extinguish the fiery debates. Now let me ask you, if you were there, standing amidst the storm, which side would you take? Would you side with Arius, the logical reformer, or Athanasius, the unyielding defender of orthodoxy? 2. The drafting of the Nicene Creed, a turning point. The tide began to turn when a draft of the Nicene Creed was introduced. This document, crafted with deliberate precision, aimed to end the theological war by clearly defining the nature of Christ. The creed declared that Christ was begotten, not made, and of one being with the Father. These words were more than theological statements. They were a direct rebuttal to Arianism. By affirming that Christ was of the same essence as the Father, the Creed rejected the idea that he was a created being. But the process of finalizing the Creed was anything but smooth. Every word was scrutinized, every phrase debated. Bishops loyal to Arius pushed back fiercely, warning that the language was too rigid and left no room for alternative interpretations. Tension filled the room. Would they reach consensus, or would the council end in chaos? What's your take so far? Was the council right to insist on such definitive language, or should they have left space for differing views? Let us know in the comments below. 2. The rejection of Arianism. As the debates continued, the majority of bishops began to align against Arius. His teachings, they argued, threatened the very foundation of Christian faith. If Christ were not fully divine, how could his sacrifice redeem humanity? When the Creed was finally presented for a vote, the room was electric with anticipation. Bishop after bishop stepped forward to sign the document, signaling their agreement. But a small group of Arian supporters refused, standing firm in their dissent. The rejection of Arianism was decisive. Arius and his followers were labeled heretics, their teachings condemned. Emperor Constantine, eager to enforce the council's decision, ordered Arius into exile and decreed that his writings be destroyed. But here's the question that lingers. Was this a victory for truth or a suppression of dissent? 3. The aftermath, a legacy written in Creed. The Nicene Creed didn't just resolve the immediate crisis. It set a precedent for how the Church would handle theological disputes for centuries to come. By establishing a clear statement of orthodoxy, the Creed provided a foundation for Christian belief that still resonates today. Yet, the Council's decision also raised uncomfortable questions. Was the suppression of Arianism an act of spiritual clarity, or did it stifle legitimate exploration of faith? And what of Arius himself? Was he a heretic or a misunderstood thinker challenging the status quo? These questions remain relevant even now. Faith, after all, is as much about questions as it is about answers. What do you think? Did the Nicene Creed bring unity at the cost of freedom? Or was it a necessary step to preserve the integrity of Christian belief? Share your thoughts in the comments. We're eager to hear your perspective. 4. The weight of a decision. Imagine being one of the bishops in that room. Signing the Creed meant aligning with the majority, but it also meant rejecting a viewpoint held by many within the Church. Not signing meant risking exile, condemnation, and isolation. What would you have done? Would you have stood with the majority to preserve unity, or would you have stood by your convictions, no matter the cost? 5. A decision that echoes through time. The Nicene Creed's impact was immediate, but its influence has echoed across centuries. It became a cornerstone of Christian theology, recited in churches worldwide to this day. Yet, the controversy it sought to resolve didn't end with the council. Arianism continued to find followers, and debates over Christ's nature resurfaced in various forms throughout history. This enduring tension reminds us that faith is a living, evolving journey. Even the most definitive creeds can't silence the questions that drive us to seek deeper understanding. So here's one final question for you. What does the Nicene Creed mean to you today? Is it a symbol of unity, a relic of division, or something else entirely? Let's continue the conversation below. The Council of Nicaea was just the beginning. In the centuries that followed, the Church faced new controversies, new councils, and new challenges to its unity. And Arius, his story didn't end with exile. It took unexpected turns that would continue to shape history. Stay tuned, because in our next video, we'll explore the aftermath of the Nicene Council and the surprising ways its decisions shaped the Church and the world as we know it. If this journey into history has sparked your curiosity, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you agree with the Council's decision? What lessons can we learn from this pivotal moment in history? Drop a comment, hit the like button, and don't forget to subscribe to Ancient Faith Explorations. Together, we'll uncover the hidden stories that shape the faith we know today. The Arian controversy wasn't merely a theological debate. It was a defining moment in the history of Christianity, one that would echo across centuries and mold the very doctrines that shape our faith today. When the bishops of Nicaea gathered, they weren't just deciding on a theological matter. They were staking a claim on the soul of Christianity itself. The Nicene Creed became the defining statement of Christian orthodoxy, firmly establishing the divinity of Christ and affirming his equality with the Father. It settled a question that had divided the early church and created a legacy that remains a cornerstone of Christian doctrine. But the consequences of this battle didn't end there. The rejection of Arianism set a precedent for how the church would handle dissent, and the ripple effects of this decision are still felt in every church today. The questions raised during that moment in history continue to influence theological discussions, shaping the way we understand Christ and his relationship with God. This wasn't just a debate about Christ's nature. It was a battle for the soul of Christianity, and its ripple effects are still felt in every church today. What's your take on the Arian controversy? Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you side with Arius or Athanasius? Like this video if you learned something new. Subscribe to Ancient Faith Explorations for more untold stories of faith, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. And don't forget to share this video with friends who love exploring the mysteries of history and theology.